one of the really cool exercises we do at a workshop is we have people prepare for a difficult conversation. And then we say, okay, now you're going to do the difficult conversation, but you're going to be the other person. You're going to respond as if I'm going to take what you prepared and I'm going to have you respond as if you, and it's amazing. It forces them to say, oh, well, but then you did this and but you were this. And you're like, oh yeah, I have some ownership in this and what they would want to hear. And so, yeah, it's really about, again, there's emotional empathy, which is what you talked about, understanding their feelings, but there's cognitive empathy, which is understanding what their thoughts are, what they're going through, what their experiences have been.
And we are live for another episode of Being Human. Delighted to say I'm here with Bill Benjamin. He is the co-owner of The Last 8%, which is dedicated to team-level high performance and culture in organizations. It's a delight to have you on the show, Bill. A very warm welcome.
Thank you. Always great to be here.
Great. And with all my guests, I love to start with a little bit of your backstory, where you grew up, some of your early influences, what your childhood was like, to kind of ground us in who you are as we explore all of the ideas associated with this concept, the last 8%.
Great. By the way, if we're going to talk about my childhood, we might need 2 or 3 hours. No, I'm kidding. I mean, the kind of critical part of my story is that, I was always good at math.
Okay.
And so I went and got degrees in mathematics and computer science. And I spent 14 years in the computer software industry. And people always ask, well, how do you go from, mathematics and computer science to talking about culture and emotional intelligence? And the story is that I was pretty good at my job. So, what do organizations do with their high performers? Well, they burn them out, give them more work, and then promote them, make them a manager. And it turned out I wasn't a very good manager. People didn't really like working for me. I didn't recognize this at first, but eventually I figured out I wasn't having the impact as a leader I wanted to. I wasn't creating a great culture on my team. The harder lesson for me as a guy with degrees in mathematics and computer science was that improving the situation, improving my abilities as a leader wasn't going to be about getting smarter because your IQ is pretty much fixed after a certain age. Rich, I don't think you're under the age of 16.
No.
No. So your IQ is pretty much fixed after age 16. You can't really get smarter. So, I had to learn that the one thing that could help me be better was this whole area of emotional intelligence, self-awareness, understanding how to interact, how to motivate and inspire people.
Right. Got it. And so what was your sort of first move then, once you realized that you weren't so good at the management and the leadership? Where did you start to invest? What did you look at?
Yeah. Well, I was really fortunate. I actually went to high school with JP, the founder of the company that I work for, the Last 8% organization. And I actually very early, this is going back 26 years ago, actually had him deliver when he first founded the company, a program, a workshop for my organization, my computer software company. And it really resonated with me. I really recognized the challenges that, the things that I was struggling with, and that the work that he was talking about could really help me. And actually spent the next 3 or 4 years getting coached by him, doing the assessment, really putting this stuff into practice at the computer software company. And then we had always talked about working together, and eventually 24 years ago, we decided to become partners. So I've been doing this for 24 years now, but, I love my career in the computer software industry, but, this is my real life's work.
Right. Love it. And what was it? Because I'm really fascinated by that transition. That sounds like it's pretty monumental in your life. What were some of the things that emerged for you then when you started to do that work with JP?
Just my stupid brain. And specifically managing emotions.
Okay.
So I didn't recognize that I wasn't managing emotions effectively when I didn't agree with someone, or when someone was listening to me. I would interrupt. I actually yelled at people, if you can imagine. And so I wasn't managing emotions well. And as a guy with degrees in mathematics and computer science, I wasn't very open to the idea of emotional intelligence until I understood the brain science. and that there were chemicals that were being triggered when I got frustrated. By the way, I wasn't always yelling at people. I was also avoiding things. I was also, not. Yeah, I learned very early on that I wasn't good at having difficult conversations, so I just avoided them. Um, and so I just learned, and that was emotional too. The avoidance, that's fear. And so I just really recognized that, I was struggling with managing my brain, and managing emotions. And it was also having an effect in my personal life. It wasn't just work. And so, I just recognized that I needed to do better at that. And I needed to learn some skills and strategies to be more effective.
Right. And presumably you started to see some results, and that's why you kept going.
Yeah, I mean, I had been promoted at the computer software company, and I was struggling, and then actually putting some of this work into practice. And this isn't an overnight success. It took a year or two, but then based on that, I actually got promoted again, and I ended up, at the end of my career at that computer software company, I was the vice president, and we were growing and did really well. And so, yeah, it had impact for me, but probably more importantly, it helped me in my personal life. I was dealing with a lot of anxiety. I heard a quote back then that's always stuck with me. And the quote is, "I've had a lot of great moments in my life. I just wish I'd been there for more of them."
Right. Yeah.
So, I really want to do something about that situation. So this work it really helped me be able to be more present, not always, worrying and anxious, and able to manage some of those emotions. So yeah, it absolutely had a huge impact for me personally, which is why I decided to leave the computer software field and join what at the time was this little company that JP had founded, and do this work for a living. It was a big risk. I mean, I was a vice president of a software company making good money, and gave all that up to essentially join what was really a startup at the time.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, good for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. But followed your heart and went for it. I'm sure the story with about anxiety will resonate with a lot of listeners. I mean, that's extremely prevalent. I don't know if it's certainly very high right now. I'm guessing that it's higher than it has been historically.
We're seeing it absolutely. People feeling overwhelmed, people feeling burnt out, people feeling stressed and anxious. Yeah, absolutely. We see a lot of that in organizations.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm going to really look forward to. I'm sure we'll get into that and some of the tools and so on that you've got that help with
I
that.
mean, some of that's all the uncertainty. There's just human brains don't like uncertainty. So you already have the pressure of trying to perform. You already have the difficult relationships, and then you add in all this uncertainty, and it just makes things so much more stressful for people.
Yeah. Well, maybe let's start there then. What were some of the strategies and the tools that helped you specifically with anxiety?
Well, I mean, the first thing was recognizing, and at the time we didn't call it the last 8%. We came up with that term about 4 or 5 years ago. But the last 8% is really about the difficult moments. We're all pretty good at the 92% when everyone's getting along and the deadlines are being met. But when there's tension, when there's pressure, and when there's conflict, those are critical moments. And by the way, we know that because of the cortisol effect. We love brain science here. And what I recognized is that when cortisol gets released, it does a number of things. But one of the things that does is it causes memories to sear in. So in a difficult moment, that's what people remember. They don't remember what you're doing in the 92% of moments. So the first thing, and then that becomes your reputation. So because that's what people remember. And then that becomes the culture on the team. So that's what establishes the norms of culture, is how people show up in the difficult moments. I mean, I see you nodding. So most people kind of inherently get that. So the first thing was I had to recognize that it was actually those challenging moments when I was emotionally triggered that were actually going to have the biggest impact on changing this, kind of the trajectory of my career and my personal life. So that was number one, is recognizing that. And the last 8% is really about the gap between the risk we know we should take, the conversation we know we should have, the decision we know we should make, and the risk we are taking. And we're actually able to quantify it. We did a survey of 34,000 people and determined on average, it's 7.56% that people feel they leave unsaid, or a decision they don't make. So we rounded it up to 8%. So that 8%, there's a kind of research foundation to that. So the last 8% is really all about taking risks in those difficult moments, not avoiding, but also not making a mess. So we talk about people either being avoiders or make a messers. And for most of us, depending on the situation, here we might avoid or make a mess.
Right. Okay. And your anxiety. And so what role was anxiety playing in terms of you and your 8%?
Yeah. So I mean, really, when you know that you've either made a mess, you feel bad about it, or you're avoiding something and you feel bad about it, you actually end up feeling a little bit of shame and regret. That triggers the anxiety. When we live out of alignment with our values, how we know we want to be, and the actions we're actually taking, that causes a lot of anxiety. And so that's what it was for me. I wasn't showing up in my difficult moments, my last 8% moments, the way I wanted to. And then and then that was having an impact on people's performance. And then there was a lot more toxicity, and there was people. It also increases the anxiety around me. I'm creating anxiety in other people, and so it's lifting all boats in terms of the anxiety.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love what you say, that making that point about how when we have high cortisol, that sears in the memory, and that does fix the subculture, doesn't it? We all sort of know what the limits of our boss, and we experience them at their worst, and then that stays with us, doesn't it? So then everything sort of then orients around the boss's worst behavior, right?
Oh, absolutely. And an example is I wasn't that good at receiving critical feedback. So someone was questioning something I did, or pointing out a mistake, or challenging me, I would get defensive, which would immediately shut other people down. Then they don't feel valued, they don't feel heard, they don't feel listened, they don't feel like they can speak up. There's no point. And so I was creating a culture, kind of a fear-based or transactional culture. We have a culture map we can talk about in a little bit, but I definitely created a more transactional, fear-based culture. And because of my anxiety and because of not managing emotions.
And this is helped me join a dot here, because I had Amy Edmondson on the show, right, who's done all the work on psychological safety, and she makes the point about how psychological safety is fragile, right? It's fantastic, and it's a component of high performance, but you've only got to have somebody in authority make one outburst, and that's it, right? You're sort of back to ground zero. But what you've just said validates why that's true. It's because that memory becomes so tightly held by the group. It's not something that we just easily brush off, and that's why psychological safety is fragile, or perhaps one of the reasons why psychological safety is fragile.
Absolutely. And that's a really great point. I love Amy's work. And it's not just the outburst, though. That's the make a mess behavior. That is hugely impactful.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also the leader that's avoiding. That isn't making a tough people decision, that isn't, modeling taking risks themselves. That also lessens psychological safety, because people are like, well, why bother? There's no point in bringing this stuff up. He doesn't deal with stuff, And so psychological safety can also be impacted by people who avoid the tough thing.
Yeah, and we remember, when something doesn't get challenged or goes unsaid, in the same way, because I guess that would also cause stress, right? Because that may affect my feeling of safety.
Yeah, I mean, and we've interviewed a number of leaders for our book, and I've never had a leader say, "Oh, I wish I'd taken longer to deal with that underperformer." Right. And I've done that, right? I've let a underperformer go because I didn't want to deal with it. It would have been a lot of work to replace them. And so when you don't deal with an underperformer, not only are they underperforming, and it's a disservice to them, but it affects everyone else on the team. So it has huge impact on the team dynamics and even the psychological safety within the team.
Yeah. That which is a classic avoidant behavior, and a destructive one, right? Because if everyone's looking to that figure of authority to make the call and say the obvious and do something about the individual, and they're not.
Yeah. Well, and it's the same with the toxic high performer,
right?
Right. If you allow which I've also done, I've let a toxic high performer stay in a role and not really give them feedback because I was afraid to give them feedback. And again, they might be getting results, but one toxic individual can derail the performance of a team by 30 to 40%. So they're getting results, but it's derailing the rest of the team.
Yeah. Great point. Okay, so we've touched a little bit into this idea of the last 8%. Is there a framework or a way for you to paint a picture of the main facets of this approach?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's very personal in terms of, when we deliver a workshop, of people recognizing what are their last 8% moments.
Okay.
So what are the things that cause me stress, anxiety, uncertainty? I mean, when you're with a group of leaders, a very common one is giving performance feedback. But some other examples are things like naming an inconvenient truth. So we have a culture assessment where we can assess the culture of a team, an organization. And one of the questions is, we name inconvenient truths on this team. And most organizations and teams actually score very low on that. Well, you know what happens when an inconvenient truth isn't named, right? Then whatever the issue is doesn't get dealt with. It becomes this unspoken thing. There's the meeting after the meeting about the thing that wasn't discussed in the meeting, and so it's very destructive not to name inconvenient truths. And so it's things like that, like giving performance feedback. So it's really about receiving critical feedback, by the way, as I mentioned, if
Yeah.
you want to create an environment where people feel safe to speak up, and they'll hear your feedback. So the last 8% is really all about recognizing those things, the self-awareness that are last 8% moments for an individual.
Right.
Um, and this is kind of where it started me, and recognizing the importance of those things on my reputation as a leader. And by the way, I know I'm saying leader a fair bit, but it isn't just the leader. One individual on a team can have a huge impact on the culture in terms of how they show up in last 8% moments. If they can stay calm, if they can stay present and focused, they can calm everyone else down. But if they're getting anxious, then they're gonna, emotions are infectious. And so it isn't just for leaders. It's really anybody, who works with other people on a team.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so that's really the first part of the last 8% is that self-awareness.
Yeah. And how, if people are listening and just want to sort of enter their own inquiry on this, what would be the typical questions that someone might ask to help them get to that for them as an individual?
I mean, to be honest, again, in a workshop, once we describe what the last 8% is, we do an exercise where we ask people to share with others what their last 8% moments are. That's all you need.
Yeah, right. They just get it. Yeah, I guess at some level we all know, right?
I
Yeah.
mean, you're probably thinking of some as I've been describing this.
I'm trying. Well, okay, that's good. You put me on the spot now. I was more focusing on where I was going with the conversation. What would be my last 8%? Yeah, a procrastination on difficult conversations for sure.
Mm,
Yeah,
yeah,
I
yeah,
can think of
that's
one
that's
right
that's
now. I'm not having with a family member I've put off for a couple of days. Yeah, there you go.
yeah. So yeah, literally, you went out there a little bit, but you said I can think of one that I should be having with
With
a
a
family
family
member,
member, yeah. Like, but then I'd
and
put off for a couple of days. Yeah,
and that's also very common, that this doesn't just apply at work, right? We all have last 8% moments. We all have emotions get triggered in our personal lives, and for a lot of us more so. And so we
yeah,
just know, if people are practicing, listening to their kids, they're more likely to listen to their teammates or their employees. And so the brain learns it in whatever situation it's in. So if people are practicing this work at home, that's a great thing. Um,
yeah, yeah,
so yeah, so people kind of inherently, intuitively get
yeah.
that they have these last 8% moments. And it's really all about pushing into the discomfort that a last 8% moment creates, because there is short-term discomfort. But if you don't step in, if you don't make that tough decision, then you tend to have long-term regret. You're really trading short-term discomfort for long-term regret. And it's that long-term regret that starts to create that anxiety and even depression at times, if it gets really extreme, but certainly, not feeling the best about ourselves. So the whole concept, it really is about pushing into that short-term discomfort.
Right. And presumably then part of your approach is helping people. And I know there were plenty of strategies in the former book, which I know you contributed to, how to perform under pressure.
Yeah.
The strategies for how people can push into those behaviors.
Absolutely. In a last 8% moment, and by the way, there's two kinds of last 8% moments. There's the expected ones, where I know this conversation is going to frustrate the person. I have to say no, or I'm going to make a decision that they didn't agree with. In one of our research studies, that's people they say that that's 42% on average of their last 8% moments, the unexpected. The expected. The other 58% are the unexpected type. You're going about your day, and all of a sudden you get this email, this person says this thing, or a decision's made you don't agree with, and suddenly you're getting triggered. So, we teach strategies both, when you can plan for an expected conversation or decision, and what do you do in those unexpected moments? And you're right, some of those strategies come from the Performing Under Pressure book, and some of them are newer strategies that we're going to be doing in our upcoming book. I'll give you an example. For an expected conversation, one of the best ways to start a conversation is by stating a positive intention for the conversation. So often, we've been ruminating about it. We're up at night thinking about it. We're preparing, and we get in there, we're anxious, and we just launch right into it. And, well, you did this, and you need to do this. And suddenly the person's on the defensive, and they don't know if they're in trouble or they're being attacked. Or whereas if you start and say, hey, I think you can be a high performer, and I'm going to give you this feedback because I want you to be better, or I want to have a great relationship with you because I really appreciate the good things in our relationship. That's stating a positive intention. It actually calms their emotional brain. So they feel safe. Okay, I know why Bill's having this conversation. It's because he cares about me. It's because he wants me to be my best. And so that is one strategy in an expected when you have to have a last 8% conversation.
I'm immediately in my mind thinking what I could say at the start of this conversation with my family. So there you go.
Great. It's such a great way to frame a conversation. And again, whether you're a leader or it's just, hey, if it's someone on your team, you're just like, hey, I want us to have a great working relationship. I want us to, be able to get a lot of great work done together. So you just state that positive intention, and it really does help relax the other person so they can be more open to the feedback you're going to give them.
Yeah, I love that. And are there, let's stick on the expected theme, are there a couple of others that you particularly find yourself going to?
For the expected,
for the expected,
yeah. Another one is, again, it kind of playing off that idea that we tend to sort of launch right into the conversation, is do what we call start on the other side of the bridge, right? If you think of a bridge and there's a gap or a valley in between, and we're trying to build a bridge, most of us start from our side, is go to the other side and think about what might that person have been experiencing? What are they thinking? Why are they doing what they're doing? And Richard, that's all empathy is. I used to think empathy was icky and squishy in therapy conversations. It's not. It's just getting out of your own frame of reference and thinking about what's going on for the other person. The reason a lot of people don't do that is they think that it means giving in or being wrong. And it doesn't. It doesn't mean that you're going to, agree with them or, give into their point of view or any of that. It just means you're going to start by hearing their point of view. And that does two things. One is a lot of time you learn stuff you didn't know. Right? So you're like, oh, I didn't realize that the thing and the thing and the thing. But secondly, it allows them to feel heard. It allows them, and that calms their emotional brain. So even if you're ultimately going to come back to your side of the bridge and give them the performance feedback, make a decision that they didn't agree with, they're so much more open to it because they felt heard. They knew you cared about their point of view. So starting on the other side of the bridge, being curious in a difficult conversation is absolutely very powerful.
And I love that. And again, I've immediately make notes on this conversation I've got coming up. And what I like about that is I don't always conceive empathy as this ability to tap into what they're feeling at a given moment, right? And if I'm empathizing, I can see they're angry or I can see they're nervous, and somehow to acknowledge that and navigate it. But what you're saying is something different. Is in preparation for these difficult situations, put yourself in their position, not necessarily just about their feelings, but just that's what the way I'm hearing it is, their whole perspective and the circumstance that they perceive from where they're at, and start there. Is just immediate. Even if before I've asked any questions about how they might be thinking or feeling about it, I've already kind of got a good guess of what those things might be, and so I'm more likely to get into their world.
Absolutely. So you're right on. And even prepare some questions to ask.
Yeah.
Whatever you're thinking or assuming, it may not be accurate. And so, prepare. So in addition to thinking through that, prepare some questions to ask. One of the really cool exercises we do at a workshop is we have people prepare for a difficult conversation. And then we say, okay, now you're going to do the difficult conversation, but you're going to be the other person. You're going to respond as if I'm going to take what you prepared and I'm going to have you respond as if and it's amazing. It forces them to say, oh, well, but then you did this and but you were this. And you're like, oh yeah, I have some ownership in this and what they would want to hear. And so, yeah, it's really about, it's there. Again, there's emotional empathy, which is what you talked about, understanding their feelings, but there's cognitive empathy, which is understanding what their thoughts are, what they're going through, what their experiences have been.
And that I think that's often missed in the empathy conversation, right? We sort of go straight to the feelings, perhaps because for many of us that is a sort of thing we need to work on. But it's so important is the cognitive, as you say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I love that. Okay, so starting with a positive intent, with a positive intent. I've just been on two-day camping trip with my kids. Got tents on the back. Start with a positive intent. Get on the other side of the bridge. I love those. Yeah. In terms of the preparation for planned conversation.
The last thing I'll say, and I actually have an article which I can share that's kind of 6 steps you can go through. But the last one I'll share here is also yes to all of that, but also be really clear. What is the last 8% that you need to make sure that you say, no matter how the conversation goes? Because what tends to happen is that we get 85, 90, 95% of the way in, the other person starts reacting and we kind of hold back. So be really clear. I'm going to do everything I can. I'm going to empathize. I'm going to be curious. I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to state a positive intention, but I'm not going to leave the conversation until I let the person know what I need to say. So I don't end up living with that regret. So also to plan and be clear about what is it that I need to make sure they hear from me in that conversation.
Yeah. No, I love that. Like, yeah. The sort of sine qua non, right? This is without this, yeah. I'm not achieving what I want to achieve with the conversation. Yeah, that makes
exactly.
sense. Yeah. Great. Okay, so let's move to the unexpected then. Yeah. What tools have you got to share with us?
Yeah. And again, this isn't rocket science. I was actually presenting at NASA once and I said that. I'm like, oh, I guess it is rocket science. But we have a strategy called the SOS. And in the the first S is stop. So you have to disconnect from the trigger. Now, if you're in a meeting with someone, I don't mean literally get up and walk away, but you can do some very simple things. By the way, if you are alone, absolutely get up, stretch, use the draft folder that was designed for emotional intelligence. Don't send the email, right? But if you're in person with someone, taking a drink of water actually soothes our physiology. If you are a little triggered, you'll find your fingers curling, maybe not into a full fist. If you're completely triggered, open your palms. Again, if you're sitting, you can rest them on your lap. If you are in kind of make a mass fight mode, you'll be leaning forward, making yourself bigger. Lean back. In the reverse, if you are in avoid flight mode, you'll lean forward. Doesn't mean to step right into that moment, but this is about creating a little bit of pattern interrupt, because in that moment, the emotional brain, takes over, and we want to rest, control back to the cognitive brain. So these little things like drinking water or leaning back or leaning forward, I'm writing things down. They can all kind of help create that pattern interrupt.
I love that. Yeah.
So that's the stop. 6 seconds is the amount of time between when the stimulus impacts your brain and your neocortex catches up. So your emotional brain responds first. Then 6 seconds later, your neocortex catches up. So whether you respond for 6 seconds, 6 minutes, or 6 hours, the O in SOS is oxygenate.
Right.
The intake of a large amount of oxygen actually has the physiological effect of minimizing the chemicals that the emotional brain is released. So I'll encourage all your listeners right now to stop, let your breath out, take a deep breath in. If you just do that in that difficult, tense moment, you'll be amazed at how much of your kind of better self you'll get back. You'll actually get some working memory back. You'll be able to think more clearly. Then you can execute the third part of the strategy, which is seek information. And often we can start seeking information of ourselves first, because a lot of times we amplify the negative. If we're in the jungle and we know there's a tiger and we hear wind rustling in the bushes, what do we have to assume the wind is? A
Yeah.
tiger,
Right.
right? Now, there's two tigers. There's the real one and there's the one we just imagined. But the emotional brain reacts to us thinking it's a tiger, thinking the wind is a tiger. So one of the questions you can ask yourself is this wind or tiger? Am
Okay.
I,
Yeah.
oh, they're not getting back to me because they're being disrespectful. Or they don't, like we make all these stories up in our mind. So one of the seek information questions we can ask ourselves is, am I amplifying the negative? Is this wind or tiger? And then
That's
we
an
can
easy
start.
one to remember, though. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things we're really, really good at. I mean, we've been doing this for 24 years, is creating very simple, sticky language that people because we know in a tough moment, you can't remember a lot. So you
Yeah.
can't give people complicated techniques. It's like SOS. Okay, stop, breathe.
Yeah. No, I think genuinely, I think you've got some great stuff here because, yeah, you hear a lot of this science, but to pack it into a single image like a wind or a tiger. Yeah.
That people can kind of remember it in the moment. And then you can start to seek information, as we talked about, of the other person. Start asking questions
Right.
because you're a little more. Ironically, when we're triggered emotionally, we become more certain that we're right, even though we can't see as many options. So really, in a unexpected last 8% moment, in a difficult moment, we want to try to move from certainty and start with curiosity. Try to be curious. Why is this person asking this? What's going on? Is it wind or tiger? And then, we can sort of step in more skillfully to try to be curious in those moments.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. I love that.
Yeah.
And so my other question, I mean, I don't know how familiar you are, but on this show, we've done a lot of interviews with people concerned with the deep work, right? To really go into the trauma and releasing that and having us be, and then this is big part of my own story, be less reactive. So that longer burn, long term investment, is that something you talk about in the last 8%?
We don't, but I absolutely agree. I mean, I have a therapist, and
Yeah.
so most of us have some sort of traumas from childhood or from relationships, and that absolutely comes with us. And so, yes, I'm a big believer in doing that work. That isn't our work. Our work is kind of like once you've gotten triggered, how do you manage that so that you can show up more skillfully? But I'm a huge proponent of the work that you're talking about. The other thing that we're really doing, a lot of what we're talking about is an individual's ability to show up at their best in a difficult moment. But in order for an organization to create high performance, for someone to perform a specific set of behaviors, have an attitude, there's actually two parts to it. And it's really 50-50 according to the research. The first part is their own capabilities, skills, attitudes. The second part is the environment they're in, the culture they're in. So if you want to create a culture where people speak up, but senior leaders are shooting their ideas down, they're going to be much less likely to speak up. So that's the other work that we do, is around culture. And how do you create a culture where people are willing to take risks, the risk taking that we talked about? They're willing to step into their last 8%. And for that work, we've created a culture map that people find really resonant. And it's based on there's two key pillars of a high performing culture. One is connection, high care, what people think about when they do values and culture work, that people, have a voice, right? They feel respected. That's critical. A lot of times organizations miss the second pillar of a high performing culture, which is courage, which is the ability to do difficult things. And so we created a 4x4 culture map. So you can imagine on the left axis is courage and the bottom axis is connection. On the upper left, where it's high courage but low connection, that's more of a transactional culture where results matter over relationships. It's more of a blame, make a mess environment. There's more toxic bad apples. It's high anxiety, high burnout. It can achieve results over the short term, but it's not sustainable long term.
Yeah.
In our research, 18% of teams are in that transactional culture.
Oh, that's quite. I would have thought it was higher than that. Actually, that's quite encouraging. It's
Yeah,
quite
yeah.
yeah.
Bottom right, then, if you think of a high connection, a high care, But low courage environment, that's a family culture.
Yeah.
That's a nice culture where people are unwilling to do hard things. So there's a lot of avoidance. There's lower accountability. So there's less, performance. Decision making is really slow because everybody's got to be happy. You got everyone to agree. And people avoid because they don't want to upset others. And a lot of our clients will proudly say they have a family culture, and we say there's lots of good things to a family culture, but you can't fire your lowest performing kid.
Yeah.
You might want to on some days, but you actually can't. So you're not actually a family. It's not to be high performing. It's not enough just to have a nice, caring culture. That's 37% of organizations and teams is in that bottom right, the family culture. Bottom left, we don't see too much of that. That's low courage and low connection. That's a fear-based culture. That's a command and control culture. That's 12%. So if you're doing the math, 67% of cultures are not, high performing. So the upper right-hand quadrant, the aspiration, where it's high courage and high care and high connection, that's 33% of organizations. And that's where there is this ability to take risks. It's safe to speak up. But people feel cared about. So when someone's challenging their idea, they're not getting defensive. They're willing to listen. It's a highly innovative environment. It's feedback rich. And so that's the kind of culture that we're helping organizations create by helping leaders develop the skills to create those cultures. So it's really both together that creates, that kind of unlocks high performance. So I wanted to share that because I know that's something that for a lot of our, the people that we speak to is very resonant.
No, I love that. And that, yeah. Yeah. And that's a very simple way of thinking about it, which I appreciate.
Yeah. And most people will say, I think I've been in all four cultures. And, the impact on me was, I didn't always give my best. I wasn't always as high performing in any of the, in any of the three that weren't in the upper right-hand quadrant. The other thing that can happen is cultures don't exist across organizations. It exists on teams. So you can have a hospital with 2 floors that provide the same services, but on one floor, it has one culture and the other floor is a completely different culture, depending on the leader, depending on the team, depending on kind of, how they handle their difficult moments. So we often have people say, yeah, at our company, we have different cultures. Marketing is one culture, engineering has another culture, sales is another culture, because culture can exist on teams.
Yeah, well, exactly. And then even within departments, right? Yeah, it really is absolutely down to the team, isn't it? And people, and ultimately the boss, right? I mean, that's so often that they set the tone for the culture. So you could really say it's your immediate line manager is the biggest impact on the culture you experience.
Absolutely. So when we do our culture work, the goal is to, have a more consistent, homogenous culture that's high performance in the upper right-hand quadrant. It absolutely starts with a senior team, right? Whether that's the CEO and their team or the CIO and their team, or we even work with a chief legal officer and her team. So whoever that senior leader and the senior team is, it starts with them. And then you need each people leader to own it. Because you're right. If I'm a supervisor on the shop floor, how the CEO acts, who's 7 levels up from me, yeah, that's going to trickle down. But my number one experience is with my direct supervisor. So when we do this work, we actually cascade it all the way down through the organization so that each of the people leaders take ownership on their teams.
Yeah, yeah, and that's consistent. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Bob Chapman.
Yeah.
Everybody matters, and he talks about
Yeah.
very very aligned with your message. And yeah, as a CEO of a major manufacturing company, his realization was I have to teach every single manager in my organization this stuff. Like nothing less will achieve the cultural shift.
Absolutely. The end to that is the mistake a lot of companies make is they roll out a day of training that everyone goes to, and but they don't remember anything. Like 6 months later, they're
Right?
like, I don't
Yeah,
really
it's
remember
got to be
anything.
effective.
So when we do it, it's really more, it's short, bite-sized learning in the flow of work over an extended period of time. Because by the way, people don't have time to go to 1-day training programs. So we keep it really, minimal viable learning, a very sticky language. Because especially because we know where this needs to live is in the difficult moments.
Yeah.
So in the difficult moments, people can't remember a complicated day of training, right? They remember, oh, SOS. Or they remember, one of the other things is be curious, speak up.
Yeah.
So we keep it very simple. We do it in the flow of work. And so that is a mistake we see a lot of companies make when they do want to do culture work. They do these big event based things, but that doesn't stick. That doesn't work.
Right. Right. And you also make the point about it being over the long term. And you said at the start of this conversation, it was a year or so before you really saw a sustainable shift in your own behavior, right? And that's how
Yeah,
Mike as well. You can't
we
do this in a week or a couple. It takes time.
It's not. We say we can change a company's culture in months, not years, but we mean 6 to 9 months. We don't mean
Yeah.
2 months. So we do have companies, and because we have an assessment and we can measure, before and after. We have actually seen cultures change significantly in that 6 to 9 month period. But
Yeah.
it isn't a 1 month. Let's throw out a training and everybody's gonna start behaving differently.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. 6 to 9 months. Well, and you can achieve dramatic results in that time. Yeah, I know from my own
Well,
experience.
especially when everybody's doing it at the same time, because one of the biggest drivers of a behavior is social pressure. So if the other team is doing it and they're working on giving feedback to each other and they're working on naming inconvenient truths, well, what are they? Well, we better do that. And so when we do it, we do it through the whole organization, and that starts to create a norm on teams of, no, this is a team. We do speak up. So when someone starts giving me feedback, I'm like, where are they coming from? Why are they doing this? Like, no, that's a norm on our team. This is what we do. I get feedback from Rich, and I give Rich feedback, and so it becomes the norm across an organization. It's very powerful.
Yeah.
When we see that kind of shift.
Yeah, and people respond as to incentive in the sense of, oh, I see that team's doing well, and maybe if I do that, our team will do right. We're driven in that way,
Sense of
aren't we?
competitiveness, the social
Yeah.
pressure. Yeah, we leverage all that in this culture work that we do.
Yeah, I love that. And you say the bite size element of this. So is this how do you deliver this work? Is it yeah.
So, I mean, we do start with a senior team. So we do an assessment that involves both a quantitative but also qualitative interviews assessment. And so we do really start with a senior team. That does tend to be half-day or one-day workshops with a senior team, because you have to have that senior team buying in and modeling. But as we take it down into the rest of the organization, so one of our good clients is Tenneco Automotive. We're doing this work with 750 managers and another 4,000 or 5,000 people below them. We give each of the people leaders a 90-minute training, and then they deliver it in their team meetings. So they're given a
Okay.
toolkit, videos, a playbook, some PowerPoint, some questions to ask. So they facilitate it in their weekly team meetings. So again, it's in the flow of work. It's not everyone going away to something. It's done in the flow of work, and we actually have them talk about things that are difficult in those meetings, so they actually get the practice. Because that's the other piece. It's one thing to give people theory. It's another thing to actually have them practice. Gosh, what are
Yeah.
the tough things on our team, right? And and people have said to us, they have conversations like they've never had before. Like they're just the
Yeah.
most, amazing conversations. Because people don't talk about this stuff, right? I'm a math and computer science guy. What am I talking about? Culture and giving each other feedback. But now I understand why it's so critical and how it creates a high performing team. And so yeah, it's really amazing work.
Yeah. No, that makes so much sense to do the both, and to focus on the individual and the senior leaders and the culture simultaneously. Makes total sense.
Exactly, because if we really want to drive behavior and create behavior change, it does have to be both.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you find then that presumably what makes a good employee shifts quite a lot, and will people leave your organizations as a result of this? Does that happen?
I mean, we've had clients say that, basically, that if you don't want to buy in, if you don't want to be part of this culture where it's high care and high accountability, yeah, then this isn't the right culture for you. I don't know of any client where someone has said, yeah, I don't want to be on a high performing team. I don't want to get feedback. I don't want to be able to give it, like, I mean, somebody may have left and not said that, but I'm not aware of anyone. I mean, most people, they want to do good work. They want to be on a high-performing team. In fact, we talked about this a little bit earlier. That's actually what gives people a sense of satisfaction, is that this is a high-performing team that's getting good work done. They want to be on a team where there's high care. And so, again, it isn't only about the feedback and the naming conventions. It's also about we care about each other, and we're in this together. And so it really is that combination. And so, there really aren't very many people that would say, I don't want to be part of a team like that. That's what people aspire to be, is in an organization where that exists.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And what drove the question is some culture transformation approaches do regularly result in people leaving. When I think about holacracy and some of these culture change programs where the autonomy is radically increased and people lose their titles and the hierarchy is shifted significantly, that does lead to exits. But it sounds to me like you're really working at outside of the structure conversation. You're talking about behaviors and values, and you don't really. We're
not kind of a structure person. We're human behavior. We're the science of human behavior. If you want people to behave in a certain way, how do you get them to where they're willing to take risks, they're willing to communicate truth, they're willing to make tough decisions, they feel connected, they feel part of a team, there's high engagement. How do you get all that? It's all around human behavior, which is our work, not the structure stuff, not even the strategy stuff. I mean, it's critical to have a strategy, and we always want to tie our culture work to strategy. That's critical, but we don't do that strategy work. We do the human behavior work.
Yeah. And do you find then that structure can either impede or facilitate this, or is it irrelevant?
No, it does make a difference. And without going into examples, I mean, there are times where we are giving feedback, where we're making recommendations that maybe the way that you guys are set up in this area or that area, this could be improved if you did this. And so we sometimes make recommendations, but that's not our, that's not the work that we do. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's times, because what can happen a lot in organizations is different departments in organizations, they're aligned with different goals. So I used to be in sales, and I always had a really difficult relationship with finance. We used to call them the sales prevention team.
Right. Yeah.
But by the way, now that I own my own business, I get the importance of cash flow and all the things that they were. So their goals can be aligned differently. Where it becomes a problem is when it becomes personal. So yes, you do want to look at if departments or groups are aligned really in opposition to each other, and that can create that personal toxicity, that personal impact. Some of that is always going to be, some of that's healthy, right? There's healthy friction in an organization, provided it doesn't get personal. But sometimes there can just be too much friction. It's too misaligned, just because of the way humans are. And so that can happen, and we've seen that occasionally. Not that often, but occasionally we have seen that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, usually when you get people like thinking about what we talked about, thinking, gosh, what's going on for that other person? Why is that finance person challenging my this and my that? And how could I connect with that? And then explain my point of view and then work it out together. It's like, that works. People don't do it very often, but it actually works. And so it is kind of rare that it's like things are so misaligned that the humans can't work it out. I mean, humans can work out incredible things if they feel connected, if they feel valued by each other.
Yeah, that's so true, isn't it? And then if the connection is the human structure connection is so strong, then that's always going to transcend any organizational chart, right? In terms of behavior. Yeah, that makes sense.
Exactly. I mean, your podcast is called Being Human, right?
Yeah.
It isn't being structured or being aligned. It's actually being human. And so you're right. Humans can deal with so much conflict and challenge and misalignment if they really want to.
Yeah. And the great example of that, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of David Marquette and Turn the Ship Around.
No, I'm not familiar with that.
He's a US sailor or captain of a submarine, and he takes the lowest performing sub in the US naval fleet, and to the highest performing in 1 year, right? And to your point about how quickly a culture can change.
Yeah.
But he did that all through leadership behavior. So he couldn't change the structure, right? I mean, the naval hierarchy is the naval hierarchy, right? He doesn't have any choice.
Yeah.
And yet he completely completely transformed the culture of the ship and to it becoming the highest performing
I'm
culture.
gonna have to look that up. That's
I mean,
a great.
I know you sometimes do your own podcast that he might be a fabulous guest for you, but
Yeah, thank you.
yeah, he's he's just a great example of what we're talking about, right? Like if you get the behaviors right and the values right, and you can cause a huge shift.
You can amazing things. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. So I'm so grateful for the conversation we've had. Is there anything we haven't, any aspect of the last 8% that you'd like to touch on that we haven't talked about?
I mean, just the commercial announcement that we're writing a book based on this.
Oh,
So,
cool.
keep an eye out for a book called The Last 8%. That's going to have all of this in it, the emotional intelligence strategies, the culture stuff. And so, yeah. So keep an eye out for that. And we just love this work. And I mean, thank you. You've been asked great questions, and this has been a really fun interview.
No, brilliant. No, I've really appreciated it. And so you're doing much more of the writing duties on this one, right?
Yeah, I'm one of the co-authors, and we learned a lot in our first book about how to launch a book, and how to get it in the hands of people. So yeah, there's a whole lot of other work that we're doing, so that people can get access to the book.
And what have you learned from being an author? How's that been?
Number one, that it's hard.
Yeah.
To anybody who's written a book, congratulations. It's a lot of work. Number two, that to sell the book, it's likely your publisher isn't really going to do much. I mean, we had one of the best publishers in the world for our last book. And I mean, they got it in the bookstores, they got it on Amazon. They did what they were meant to do. They wrote a nice book cover and helped us edit it. They did all that, but they really didn't get us any PR, or really didn't help us sell books. So, for most authors, unless you're Oprah or Simon Sinek, you're going to have to do a lot of the work yourself, to sell the book. And so that's, something that we now have learned, just if you build it, they will come, doesn't really work. I mean, even though our last book was a New York Times bestseller, like we did really well, with it, but we did most of that work. It was more of the learning.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great insight.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. Yes. I suppose I'm partly motivated because one day I might write my own book. But yeah, everybody I've asked that question to has talked about the work involved.
Yeah, and it's because you want it to be, because a labor of love. It's your personal content. It's things you want people to learn. So you want it to be accessible and meaningful. And so yeah, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, for it to be great, and be able to impact people. And that's a good thing. And it also makes it challenging to feel like you really want it to be something that really is going to impact people.
Right. Great. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
You've obviously got to the point now where it's just a question of getting it. Well, you're close to the finish line in terms of getting
manuscript is close to done. Yep.
Awesome. Great. Fantastic. Okay. Well, Bill, thanks once again. It's been really energizing, insightful, and I'm hoping it's going to be give inspiring for people to go out there and change their own cultures. They can get the book, and if they want to consult with you guys, it's give people the URL.
Just look up The Last 8%. The company name is the Institute for Health and Human Potential, ihhp.com. But if you just type in Last 8%, you'll find us.
Yeah, great. Good. All right. Well, thanks again, Bill, and it's been wonderful.
Rich, it was a pleasure, and good luck with that conversation that
I will. Yeah, I'm well prepared now.
You've got some additional tools and skills now to help you.
Exactly. Thank you. All right. Fantastic. Thank you, Bill.